You see that up there in the corner? Just a big puddle of gold on the edge there. That's really cool.
In the Klondike, every miner hears stories about places that should never be touched, and one of the most feared spots was a mine shaft known as the Widow's Cut, a place so unstable and so dangerous that it was seen as a career-ending move to even think about working it, because heavy equipment had been lost there before, money had vanished into the ground, and earlier crews had walked away with nothing but damage and regrets. This shaft had a reputation for swallowing machines, collapsing without warning, and turning promising seasons into total disasters. So over time, it stopped being just another claim and became a kind of warning sign for anyone who wanted to stay in the gold game long enough to make a living. Then came Parker Schnabel, a miner already known for taking big risks and pushing his crew hard, looking for a way to bring in a serious new score for the season. And when maps and ground reports went on the table, the Widow's Cut kept showing up as the one place that might hold enough gold to change his whole operation, if it did not destroy it first. Most experienced miners looked at that shaft and saw only danger, deep permafrost that could break loose and fall, hidden water that could flood the workings, and a long history of failed attempts. But Parker saw something else, a chance to turn a cursed piece of ground into a massive win, and prove that his style of high-risk, high-reward mining still worked in the modern Klondike. The decision to go after the Widow's Cut meant putting machines, money, and lives on the line in a place almost everyone else had avoided for years. And the twist to this story is simple. This fool's errand did not just pay off. It led to thousands of ounces of gold pulled in just a few days and opened up a gold vein with the potential to be worth tens of millions of dollars. The path to that point, however, ran straight through some of the worst ground in the region and forced Parker and his crew to fight not only the earth itself, but time, temperature, and the weight of everything riding on this one decision.
The Widow's Cut was feared for very practical reasons, starting with the permafrost that surrounded and buried it, because this was not soft, frozen topsoil that could easily be scraped away, but ancient ground locked solid for thousands of years, as hard as concrete, and stacked in layers that could hold their shape for a long time and then suddenly shift without warning, sending huge chunks of frozen rock and dirt crashing into any open space a crew managed to dig out. Working inside that kind of environment meant living with the constant risk that multi-ton slabs of frozen ground could snap loose and fall into the shaft, crushing equipment and anyone standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. And no amount of experience completely removed that danger, because the ground itself was unpredictable once it started to thaw or move. On top of the permafrost problem, there was the threat of water, which made everything even more unstable, since melting ice from above or hidden underground springs from below could turn the walls of a shaft into mud in a very short time, collapsing supports and flooding tunnels. And one strong rush of icy water could fill the workings, bury machines, smash pumps, and turn millions of dollars in iron and steel into useless junk. This was especially scary at the Widow's Cut because of its depth and layout, where any flooding would be hard to control or reverse. And while all that was happening, regular mining work still needed to continue, with Parker's crew already trying to strip ground, keep the plant fed, and maintain sluicing operations just to bring in steady gold and cover day-to-day costs. So there was not a lot of extra time or manpower to babysit a dangerous side project that might not pay off. The shaft had already gained a reputation for turning into a one-way trip for money and equipment, and older miners around the Klondike treated it as a kind of warning about what happens when ambition outruns safety. Because this place did not just threaten profits, it threatened long-term survival of any operation foolish enough to trust it. With that kind of background, it made sense that only someone under serious pressure and with a strong appetite for risk would even think about going back there. And that is exactly where Parker's situation comes in, because the more the Widow's Cut looked like a guaranteed failure to everyone else, the more it looked like a test that had to be passed to keep his operation moving forward.
Parker Schnabel stood in a very unusual position for a young miner, already leading a huge operation in the Klondike, already responsible for expensive machines and a full crew, and already carrying the weight of a family legacy that went back to his grandfather, John Schnabel, who had become a well-known figure on television and in the mining world. Every time Parker stacked gold at the end of a season, that legacy hovered in in the background, a reminder that his success was not just about money, but about proving that the Schnabel name still meant something in serious gold mining. And that kind of pressure was always present, even when cameras were not rolling. On top of that, there were the public ups and downs that came with the Gold Rush show, including the very visible breakup with Ashley Ewell, which many fans linked to the brutal schedule, remote lifestyle, and constant stress that came with Parker's all-in focus on mining. And those personal changes only added to the sense that every new season had to deliver bigger results to justify the sacrifices that had already been made. The work itself had become more intense over time, with larger ground deals, more fuel burned each day, and more people depending on the operation for their paychecks. And when a modern mine runs on this kind of scale, one bad season does not just hurt feelings, it threatens the entire business. Because of that, smaller, safer wins no longer felt like enough, and ordinary cuts that might have satisfied other miners started to look like time wasters that would not cover the rising cost of doing business at Parker's level. At the same time, there were rivalries to think about, especially with other big-name miners in the region, and every big cleanup or bold decision turned into something fans, crews, and competitors would talk about and compare, sometimes lifting Parker up, sometimes dragging him down. This mix of family expectations, public attention, personal losses, and rising costs created a situation where stepping away from a potential jackpot like the Widow's Cut did not feel like smart caution. It felt like giving up a chance that might never come again.
The Klondike environment added even more pressure to the decision. Because the mining area sat only about 150 miles south of the Arctic Circle, which meant that when winter came, it hit hard, with cold air settling in, freezing pipes, stalling engines, and making simple repairs much more difficult and much more tiring for everyone on site. And during those conditions, even normal cuts became a challenge, let alone a dangerous shaft like the Widow's Cut. Rough weather and a short mining season meant time could not be wasted, and simply digging harder with bigger machines, the usual solution in many mining problems, was not going to work against the combination of deep permafrost and hidden water, because brute force would only increase the risk and cost. That is where technology stepped in, as Parker's team chose to fight the ground with better information instead of just more horsepower, bringing in drones equipped with LiDAR, a system that sends out millions of laser pulses to measure distance and create a very detailed 3D picture of the land below. The drones flew back and forth over the claim in careful patterns, scanning the surface of the Widow's Cut and the surrounding area, while the LiDAR unit collected data that could be processed by computers into a map far more precise than anything old prospectors could have imagined. Once that data was turned into usable images, the crew could look through the brush and uneven surface to see depressions, old workings, and shapes that suggested past mining activity. And this was important because their first plan for the Widow's Cut had been to dig a brand new ramp down from the side, carving a long path through frozen ground, installing supports, and constantly fighting the threat of floods. That approach would have taken a lot of time, a lot of fuel, and a lot of labor, and every extra day spent on it would have eaten into the short mining season, pushing the whole operation closer to the point where the season goal could not be reached anymore, even if rich ground was somehow found late. The LiDAR data offered another possibility, and when technicians and crew members started studying the images carefully, a strange narrow feature became visible under the surface, a shape that did not match natural terrain and lined up with the old stories about how the Widow's Cut had been worked many years earlier. This hinted that the ground might be hiding an old vertical shaft, long collapsed and forgotten, and that single hint opened the door to a completely different plan. Instead of waging war on the permafrost from above, it might be possible to reuse a path that earlier miners had already started, if it could be found and made safe again. The LiDAR images and ground checks confirmed that an old vertical shaft did exist under the Widow's Cut, buried under years of brush, dirt, and frozen debris. A relic from a much older mining effort that had ended with collapse and abandonment, and it reached roughly 40 meters down, or about 130 feet, which matched almost perfectly with the depth where the rumored rich ground was supposed to lie. This discovery offered both an opportunity and a warning, because the shaft clearly showed that earlier miners had believed in the promise of this location strongly enough to dig down that far. But the fact that it had collapsed and disappeared under the earth also proved how unstable and dangerous the zone really was. Parker and the crew now had a decision: continue with the idea of cutting a new ramp and spend a huge amount of time and money fighting permafrost and water from the surface, or gamble on reopening a shaft that nature had already crushed once. The second plan looked extremely risky, but in terms of time and potential payoff, it was also the only path that made sense, because the old shaft connected directly to the exact depth they wanted to reach, which could save weeks or even months of heavy digging. And with the season clock ticking and costs rising, those weeks could easily be the difference between success and failure. Taking the gamble meant launching a careful and slow rescue job on the shaft, reinforcing it with modern materials and methods, and turning a collapsed and unstable hole into a secure passage. Heavy steel beams were brought in and fitted into place, supports were installed section by section, and every small piece of progress had to be checked to make sure no cracks or shifts were starting in the walls. Work inside the shaft took nerves of steel, because everyone understood that the earth around them had already proven willing to move. And even with modern gear, there was no way to make the risk disappear completely. Above ground, pressure from fuel bills, payroll, and deadlines continued to stack up, and Parker responded by tightening standards and demanding that every worker stay focused, with no shortcuts and no rushing, because in a confined space like that shaft, one careless action could bring down rock and ice without warning. Very slowly, the collapsed tunnel began to reopen, transformed from a buried ruin into a reinforced vertical path, and eventually conditions reached the point where the crew decided it was safe enough to explore more fully. Lights were checked, everything was secured, and the descent began, step by step, into a part of the claim that had been closed off for decades, with everyone hoping that the risk, the cost, and the stress would finally be justified by what waited at the bottom.
At the bottom of the reopened shaft, the crew finally came face to face with the real secret of the Widow's Cut, when their lights revealed a thick, quartz-rich gold vein running through the rock. Not just a little scattered color, but a clear band of hard rock lode gold, the kind of deposit that acts as the original source for the loose placer gold that washes into stream beds and has tempted prospectors for generations. Finding a vein like that is often described as the ultimate goal in hard rock mining, because it means the search has reached the place where the gold actually formed and settled in the rock, instead of just chasing what is broken free and moved around over time. And in that moment, it became clear that the old stories about the Widow's Cut had not been wrong about its potential, just beaten by the dangers around it. Once the reality of the find sank in, everything changed for the operation, because this was no longer a question about if the Widow's Cut would pay, but about how fast and how safely the crew could pull out as much gold-bearing rock as possible before the short season ended and before the rest of the region caught on to what was happening. In a place like the Klondike, rumors spread quickly, and any hint that a once-abandoned shaft had turned into a gold factory would attract attention. So the crew shifted gears into a non-stop push, working around the clock for about 72 straight hours, 3 full days of intense effort. Machines ran almost without rest, hauling out pay rock from the bottom of the shaft, sending it up to be processed, and feeding the wash plant as fast as conditions allowed. And even though the work was exhausting, the sight of gold building up in cleanups helped keep the energy high. When the first major cleanup from this new vein was finished, the numbers told the story. More than 4,000 ounces of gold came out of that initial stretch of the vein alone, and at modern prices, that amount sits around $10 million in value, covering a huge portion of the season's operating costs in just a few days. The geological picture made things even more interesting, because the vein did not simply stop at the edge of the first exposed section, and measurements suggested it continued on, possibly stretching for around 2 kilometers through the rock, which led to internal estimates that the total potential value from this discovery could reach around $75 million more if the grade and thickness stayed strong over that length. Those projections were not official totals, but even conservative thinking made it clear that this was not just a good cut, it was a career-defining strike that could reshape the entire operation's future, and it came from a place almost every other miner had written off as hopeless. The Widow's Cut had turned from a warning into a gold mine in the most literal way possible, but big scores always come with new problems, and the fallout from such a massive win was waiting just around the corner.
Once the scale of the win at the Widow's Cut became clear, it was only a matter of time before word began to spread around the Klondike, as neighboring crews, local workers, and people connected to the mining scene started talking about a reopened shaft, a hidden vein, and a huge cleanup that had turned a supposed dead zone into the most valuable ground around. That kind of talk draws attention fast, and suddenly the Widow's Cut was not just a legend of danger, but a symbol of what modern tech, stubborn effort, and risky planning could achieve. And at the same time, it turned Parker and his crew into even bigger targets for curiosity, competition, and outside pressure. A discovery of that size meant the claim had to be fully secure, legally and physically, with boundaries clearly marked, paperwork completely in order, and access tightly controlled, because no serious operator wants any confusion about who owns the rights to a gold vein that could be worth tens of millions of dollars over time. Outside the claim lines, the interest in Parker's move at the Widow's Cut added new fuel to conversations about his leadership, his risk tolerance, and his personal life, as fans and critics debated whether this kind of high-stakes decision-making would keep paying off or eventually push things too far. At the same time, the win did not remove the constant pressure of future seasons, because costs in modern mining remain high, equipment continues to wear out, fuel prices never really relax, and crews expect steady work. So every massive score is followed by the big question of what comes next and whether that success can be repeated or even topped. The Widow's Cut story shows how quickly things can swing in mining. A shaft that once scared everyone away became the source of a life-changing jackpot. A legend of failure turned into proof that the right mix of technology and persistence can unlock ground others considered impossible. And a risky decision, which could have finished an operation if it went wrong, instead gave it a huge new push forward. It also shows how thin the line is between disaster and victory in this world, because the same permafrost, water, and instability that almost ended earlier attempts remained a real danger all the way through, and only careful planning and constant focus kept the project from turning into another collapse. In the end, the Widow's Cut stands as a perfect example of what modern Klondike mining really looks like: extreme danger, extreme investment, and the chance for extreme reward, all wrapped into one location. And anyone watching stories like this unfold can see why miners keep chasing the next big cut, even when the odds seem terrible. For viewers who want more deep dives into risky claims, legendary cuts, hidden tech, crew struggles, and massive cleanups in the gold fields, subscribing to Gold Era 2.0 helps make sure new videos and new breakdowns of stories like the Widow's Cut are not missed as more high-stakes seasons and bold decisions unfold in the Klondike.